I'm Pat Tully of the Ketchikan Public Library, and this is Reading Aloud. This evening I'm going to read a few pieces by Jerome K. Jerome. Jerome was born in England in 1859 to Marguerite and Jerome Clapp, and Jerome Clapp later renamed himself Jerome Clapp Jerome. Both of Jerome K.'s parents died by the time he was 15. So he went to work on the railroad, and after a few years of that, he started writing. He had his first real success in 1885, followed by the book I'll be reading from this evening, Idle Thoughts of an Idle Fellow, which was published in 1886. So I'll get started with the book's dedication. To the very dear and well-beloved friend of my prosperous and evil days, to the friend who, through the early stages of our acquaintanceship, did oft times disagree with me, and has since become to me my very warmest comrade. To the friend who, however often I may put him out, never now upsets me in revenge. To the friend who, treated with marked coolness by all the female members of my household, and regarded with suspicion by my very dog, nevertheless seems day by day to be more drawn by me, and in return to more and more impregnate me with the odor of his friendship. To the friend who never tells me of my faults, never wants to borrow money, and never talks about himself. To the companion of my idle hours, the soother of my sorrows, the confidant of my joys and hopes. My oldest and strongest pipe. This little volume is gratefully and affectionately dedicated. Preface. One or two friends to whom I showed these papers in manuscript, having observed that they were not half bad, and some of my relations having promised to buy the book if it ever came out, I feel I have no right to longer delay its issue. But for this, as one may say, public demand, I perhaps should not have ventured to offer these mere idle thoughts of mine as mental food for the English-speaking peoples of the earth. What readers ask nowadays in a book is that it should improve, instruct, and elevate. This book wouldn't elevate a cow. I cannot conscientiously recommend it for any useful purposes whatever. All I can suggest is that when you get tired of reading the best 100 books, you may take this up for half an hour. It will be a change. Chapter 1, On Being Idle. Now, this is a subject on which I flatter myself that I am really au fait. The gentleman who, when I was young, bathed me at Wisdom's font for 9 guineas a term, no extras, used to say he never knew a boy who could do less work in more time. And I remember my poor grandmother once incidentally observing, in the course of an instruction upon the use of the prayer book, that it was highly improbable that I should ever do much that I ought not to do, but that she felt convinced beyond a doubt that I should leave undone pretty much, everything that I ought to do. I'm afraid that I have somewhat belied half the dear old lady's prophecy. Heaven help me, I have done a good many things that I ought not to have done, in spite of my laziness. But I have fully confirmed the accuracy of her judgment, so far as neglecting much that I ought not to have neglected is concerned. Idling has always been my strong point. I take no credit to myself in that matter. It is a gift. Few possess it. There are plenty of lazy people and plenty of slow coaches, but a genuine idler is a rarity. He is not a man who slouches about with his hands in his pockets. On the contrary, his most startling characteristic is that he is always intensely busy. It is impossible to enjoy idling thoroughly unless one has plenty of work to do. There is no fun in doing nothing when you have nothing to do. Wasting time is merely an occupation then, and a most exhausting one. Idleness, like kisses, to be sweet, must be stolen. Many years ago, when I was a young man, I was taken very ill. I never could see myself that much was the matter with me, except that I had a beastly cold. But I suppose it was something very serious, for the doctor said that I ought to have come to him a month before, and that it, whatever it was, if it had gone on another week, he would not have answered for the consequences. It is an extraordinary thing, but I never knew a doctor called into any case yet, but what transpired that another day's delay would have rendered cure hopeless. Our medical guide, philosopher, and friend is like the hero in a melodrama. He always comes upon the scene just, and only just, in the nick of time. It is Providence, that's what it is. Well, as I was saying, I was very ill and was ordered to Buxton for a month, with strict injunctions to do nothing whatever all the while that I was there. Rest is what you require, said the doctor. Perfect rest. It seemed a delightful prospect. This man evidently understands my complaint, said I, and I pictured to myself a glorious time, a 4 weeks dolce de far niente with a dash of illness in it. Not too much illness, but just illness enough, just sufficient to give it a flavor of suffering and making it poetical. I should get up late, sip chocolate, and have my breakfast in slippers and a dressing gown. I should lie out in the garden in a hammock and read sentimental novels with a melancholy ending, until the book should fall from my listless hand, and I should recline there, dreamily gazing into the deep blue of the firmament, watching the fleecy clouds floating like white-sailed ships across its depths, and listening to the joyous song of the birds and the low rustling of the trees. Or, on becoming too weak to go out of doors, I should sit propped up with pillows at the open window of the ground floor front, and look wasted and interesting, so that all the pretty girls would sigh as they passed by. And twice a day I should go down in a bath chair to the colonnade to drink the waters. Oh, those waters! I knew nothing about them then, and was rather taken with the idea. Drinking the waters sounded fashionable and Queen Anne-fied, and I thought I should like them. But, after the first 3 or 4 mornings, Sam Weller's description of them as having a taste of a warm flat iron conveys only a faint idea of their hideous nauseousness. If anything could make a sick man get well quickly, it would be the knowledge that he must drink a glassful of them every day until he was recovered. I drank them neat for 6 consecutive days, and they nearly killed me. But after that I adopted the plan of taking a stiff glass of brandy and water immediately on the top of them, and found much relief thereby. I have been informed since by various eminent medical gentlemen that the alcohol must have entirely counteracted the effects of the properties contained in the water. I'm glad I was lucky enough to hit upon the right thing. But drinking the waters was only a small portion of the torture I experienced during that memorable month. A month which was, without exception, the most miserable I have ever spent. During the best part of it, I religiously followed the doctor's mandate and did nothing whatever except moon about the house and garden and go out for 2 hours a day in a bath chair. That did break the monotony to a certain extent. There is more excitement about bath chairing, especially if you are not used to the exhilarating exercise, than might appear to the casual observer. A sense of danger, such as the mere outsider might not understand, is ever present to the mind of the occupant. He feels convinced every minute that the whole concern is going over, a conviction which becomes especially lively whenever a ditch or a stretch of newly macadamized road comes in sight. Every vehicle that passes he expects is going to run into him, and he never finds himself ascending or descending a hill without immediately beginning to speculate upon his chances, supposing, as seems extremely probable, that the weak-kneed controller of his destiny should let go. But even this diversion failed to enliven after a while, and the ennui became perfectly unbearable. I felt my mind giving way under it. It is not a strong mind, and I thought it would be unwise to tax it too far. So somewhere about the 20th morning, I got up early, had a good breakfast, and walked straight off to Hayfield at the foot of the Kinder Scout. A pleasant, busy little town, reached through a lovely valley with two sweetly pretty women in it. At least they were sweetly pretty then. One passed me on the bridge and, I think, smiled, and the other was standing at an open door, making an unremunerative investment of kisses upon a red-faced baby. But it is years ago, and I dare say they have both grown stout and snappish since that time. Coming back, I saw an old man breaking stones, and it roused such a strong longing in me to use my arms that I offered him a drink to let me take his place. He was a kindly old man, and he humored me. I went for those stones with the accumulated energy of 3 weeks, and did more work in half an hour than he had done all day. But it did not make him jealous. Having taken the plunge, I went further and further into dissipation, going out for a long walk every morning and listening to the band in the pavilion every evening. But the days still passed slowly notwithstanding, and I was heartily glad when the last one came, and I was being whirled away from the gouty, consumptive Buxton to London with its stern work and life. I looked out of the carriage as we rushed through Hendon in the evening. The lurid glare overhanging the mighty city seemed to warm my heart. And when, later on, my cab rattled out of St. Pancras station, the old familiar roar that came welling up around me sounded the sweetest music I had heard for many a long day. I certainly did not enjoy that month's idling. I like idling when I ought not to be idling, not when it is the only thing I have to do. That is my pig-headed nature. The time I like best is to stand with my back to the fire, calculating how much I owe, is when my desk is heap highest with letters that must be answered by the next post. When I like to dawdle longest over my dinner is when I have a heavy evening's work before me. And if, for some urgent reason, I ought to be up particularly early in the morning, it is then, more than at any other time, that I love to lie an extra half hour in bed. Ah, how delicious it is to turn over and go to sleep again, just for 5 minutes. Is there any human being, I wonder, besides the hero of a Sunday school tale for boys, who ever gets up willingly? There are some men to whom getting up at the proper time is an utter impossibility. If 8 o'clock happens to be the time that they should turn out, then they lie till 8:30. If circumstances change and 8:30 becomes early enough for them, then it is 9 before they can rise. They are like the statesman of whom it was said that he was always punctually half an hour late. They try all manner of schemes. They buy alarm clocks, artful contrivances that go off at the wrong time and alarm the wrong people. They tell Sarah Jane to knock at the door and call them, and Sarah Jane does knock at the door and does call them, and they grunt back, "Art," and then go comfortably to sleep again. I knew one man who would actually get out and have a cold bath, and even that was of no use, for afterward he would jump back into bed to warm himself. I think myself that I could keep out of bed all right once I got out. It is the wrenching away of the head from the pillow that I find so hard, and no amount of overnight determination makes it easier. I say to myself, after having wasted the whole evening, well, I won't do any more work tonight. I'll get up early tomorrow morning. And I am thoroughly resolved to do so. Then. In the morning, however, I feel less enthusiastic about the idea, and reflect that it would have been much better if I had stopped up last night. And then there's the trouble of dressing, and the more one thinks about that, the more one wants to put it off. It is a strange thing, this bed, this mimic grave, where we stretch our tired limbs and sink away so quietly into silence and rest. O bed, O bed, O delicious bed, that heaven on earth to the weary head, as sang poor old Hood. You are a kind old nurse to us fretful boys and girls. Clever and foolish, naughty and good, you take us all in your motherly lap and hush our wayward crying. The strong man full of care, the sick man full of pain, the little maiden sobbing for her faithless lover. Like children we lay our aching heads on your white bosom, and you gently soothe us off bye-bye. Our trouble is sore indeed when you turn away and will not comfort us. How long the dawn seems coming when we cannot sleep. Oh, those hideous nights when we toss and turn in fever and pain, when we lie like living men among the dead, staring out into the dark hours that drift so slowly between us and the light. And oh, those still more hideous nights when we sit by another in pain, when the low fire startles us every now and then with a falling cinder, and the tick of the clock seems a hammer beating out the life that we are watching. But enough of beds and bedrooms. I have kept to them too long, even for an idle fellow. Let us come out and have a smoke. That wastes time just as well and does not look so bad. Tobacco has been a blessing to us idlers. What the civil servant clerk before Sir Walter's time found to occupy their minds, it is hard to imagine. I attribute the quarrelsome nature of the Middle Ages young men entirely to the want of the soothing weed. They had no work to do and could not smoke, and the consequence was that they were forever fighting and rowing. If, by any extraordinary chance, there was no war going, then they got up a deadly family feud with the next-door neighbor. And if, in spite of this, they still had a few spare moments on their hands, they occupied them with discussions as to whose sweetheart was the best-looking, the arguments employed on both sides being battle-axes, clubs, etc. Questions of taste were soon decided in those days. When a 12th century youth fell in love, he did not take 3 paces backwards, gaze into her eyes, and tell her she was too beautiful to live. He said he would step outside and see about it. And when, if he got out, he met a man and broke his head, the other man's head, I mean, then that proved that his, the first fellow's, girl was a pretty girl. But if the other fellow broke his head, well, not his own, you know, but the other fellow's, the other fellow to the second fellow, that is. Because, of course, the other fellow would only be the other fellow to him, not the first fellow who, well, if he broke his head, then his girl, well, not the other fellow's, but the fellow who was the... Look here. If A broke B's head, then A's girl was a pretty girl. If B broke A's head, then A's girl wasn't a pretty girl, but B's girl was. That was their method of conducting art criticism. Nowadays, we light a pipe and let the girls fight it out amongst themselves. They do it very well. They are getting to do all our work. They are doctors and barristers and artists. They manage theaters and promote swindles and edit newspapers. I am looking forward to the time when we men shall have nothing to do but lie in bed till 12, read 2 novels a day, have nice little 5 o'clock teas all to ourselves, and tax our brains with nothing more trying than discussions upon the latest patterns in trousers and arguments as to what Mr. Jones's coat was made of and whether it fitted him. It is a glorious prospect for idle fellows. Chapter 2. On Being in Love. You've been in love, of course. If not, you've got it to come. Love is like the measles. We all have to go through it. Also, like the measles, we take it only once. One never need be afraid of catching it a second time. The man who has had it can go into the most dangerous places and play the most foolhardy tricks with perfect safety. He can picnic in shady woods, ramble through leafy aisles, and linger on mossy seats to watch the sunset. He fears a quiet country house no more than he would his own club. He can join a family party to go down to the Rhine. He can, to see the last of a friend, venture into the very jaws of the marriage ceremony itself. He can keep his head through the whirl of a ravishing waltz, and rest afterwards in a dark conservatory, catching nothing more lasting than a cold. He can brave a moonlight walk adown sweet-scented lanes, or a midnight pull among the somber rushes. He can get over a stile without danger, scramble through a tangled hedge without being caught, come down a slippery path without falling. He can look into sunny eyes and not be dazzled. He listens to the siren voices, yet sails on with unveered helm. He clasps white hands in his, but no electric, Lulu-like force holds him bound in their dainty pressure. No, we never sicken with love twice. Cupid spends no second arrow on the same heart. Love's handmaids are our lifelong friends. Respect and admiration and affection our doors may always be left open for, but their great celestial master, in his royal progress, pays but one visit and departs. We like, we cherish, we are very, very fond of, but we never love again. A man's heart is a firework that once in its time flashes heavenward. Meteor-like, it blazes for a moment and lights its glory the whole world beneath. Then the night of our sordid commonplace life closes in around it, and the burned-out case, falling back to earth, lies useless and uncared for, slowly smoldering into ashes. Once breaking loose from our prison bonds, we dare, as mighty old Prometheus dared, to scale Olympian Mount and snatch from Phoebus's chariot the fire of the gods. Happy those who, hastening down again ere it dies out, can kindle their earthly altars at its flame. Love is too pure a light to burn long among the noisome gases that we breathe. But before it is choked out, we may use it as a torch to ignite the cozy fire of affection. And after all, that warming glow is more suited to our cold little back parlor of a world than is the burning spirit love. Love should be the vestal fire of some mighty temple, some vast, dim fane whose organ music is the rolling of the spheres. Affection will burn cheerily when the white flame of love is flickered out. Affection is a fire that can be fed from day to day and be piled up ever higher as the wintry years draw nigh. Old men and women can sit by it with their thin hands clasped. The little children can nestle down in front. The friend and neighbor has his welcome corner at its side. And even shaggy Fido and sleek Kitty can toast their noses at the bar. Let us heap the coals of kindness upon that fire. Throw on your pleasant words, your gentle pressure of the hand, your thoughtful and unselfish deeds. Fan it with good humor, patience, and forbearance. You can let the wind blow and the rain fall unheeded then, for your hearth will be warm and light, and the faces round it will make sunshine in spite of the clouds without. I'm afraid, dear Edwin and Angelina, that you expect too much from love. You think there is enough of your little hearts to feed this fierce, devouring passion for all your long lives. Ah, young folk, don't rely too much on that unsteady flicker. It will dwindle and dwindle as the months roll on, and there is no replenishing the fuel. You will watch it die out in anger and disappointment. To each it will seem that it is the other who is growing colder. Edwin sees with bitterness that Angelina no longer runs to the gate to meet him, all smiles and blushes, and when he has a cough now, she doesn't begin to cry and, putting her arms around his neck, say that she cannot live without him. The most she will probably do is suggest a lozenge, and even that in a tone implying that it is the noise more than anything that she is anxious to get rid of. Poor little Angelina, too, sheds silent tears, for Edwin has given up carrying her old handkerchief in the inside pocket of his waistcoat. Both are astonished at the falling off in the other one, but neither sees their own change. If they did, they would not suffer as they do. They would look for a cause in the right quarter, in the littleness of poor human nature, join hands over their common failing, and start building their house anew on a more earthly and enduring foundation. But we are so blind to our own shortcomings, so wide awake to those of others. Everything that happens to us is always the other person's fault. Angelina would have gone on loving Edwin for ever and ever and ever, if only Edwin had not grown so strange and different. Edwin would have adored Angelina through eternity if Angelina had only remained the same as when he first adored her. It is a cheerless hour for you both, when the lamp of love has gone out and the fire of affection is not yet lit, and you have to grope about in the cold, raw dawn of life to kindle it. God grant it catches light before the day is too far spent. Many sit shivering by the dead coals till night come. But there, of what use is it to preach? Who that feels the rush of young love through his veins can think it will ever flow feeble and slow? To the boy of 20 it seems impossible that he will not love as wildly at 60 as he does then. He cannot call to mind any middle-aged or elderly gentleman of his acquaintance who is known to exhibit symptoms of frantic attachment, but that does not interfere with his belief in himself. His love will never fail, whoever else's may. Nobody ever loved as he loves, and so, of course, the rest of the world's experience can be no guide in his place. Alas, alas, ere 30, he has joined the ranks of the sneerers. It is not his fault. Our passions, both the good and bad, cease with our blushes. We did not hate, nor grieve, nor joy, nor despair in our 30s, like we did in our teens. Disappointment does not suggest suicide, and we quaff success without intoxication. We take all things in a minor key as we grow older. There are a few majestic passages in the later acts of life's opera. Ambition takes a slightly less ambitious aim. Honor becomes more reasonable and conveniently adapts itself to circumstances. And love dies. Irreverence for the dreams of youth soon creeps like a killing frost upon our hearts. The tender shoots and the expanding flowers are nipped and withered, and of the vine that yearned to stretch its tendrils round the world, there is left but a sapless stump. My fair friends will deem all this rank heresy, I know. So far from a man's not loving after he has passed boyhood, it is not till there is a good deal of gray in his hair that they think his protestations at all worthy of attention. Young ladies take their notions of our sex from the novels written by their own, and compared with the monstrosities that masquerade for men in the pages of that nightmare literature, Pythagoras' plucked bird and Frankenstein's demon were fair average specimens of humanity. In these so-called books, the chief lover, or Greek god as he is admiringly referred to, by the way, they do not say which Greek god it is that the gentleman bears such a striking likeness to. It might be humpbacked Vulcan, or double-faced Janus, or even driveling Silenus, the god of abstruse mysteries. He resembles the whole family of them, however, in being a blackguard, and perhaps this is what is meant. To even the little manliness his classical prototypes possessed, though, he can lay no claim whatever, being a listless effeminate noodle on the shady side of 40. But oh, the depth and strength of this elderly party's emotion for some bread-and-butter schoolgirl. Hide your heads, ye young Romeos and Leanders. This blasé old beau loves with an hysterical fervor that requires 4 adjectives to every noun to properly describe. It is well, dear ladies, for us old sinners, that you study only books. Did you read Mankind, you would know that the lad's shy stammering tells a truer tale than our bold eloquence. A boy's love comes from a full heart. A man's is more often the result of a full stomach. Indeed, a man's sluggish current may not be called love, compared with the rushing fountain that wells up when a boy's heart is struck with the heavenly rod. If you would taste love, drink of the pure stream that youth pours out at your feet. Do not wait until it has become a muddy river before you stoop to catch its waves. Or is it that you like its bitter flavor, that the clear, limpid water is insipid to your palate, and that the pollution of its aftercourse gives it a relish to your lips? Must we believe those who tell us that a hand foul with the filth of a shameful life is the only one a young girl cares to be caressed by? That is the teaching that is bawled out day by day from between those yellow covers. Do they ever pause to think, I wonder, those devil's lady helps, what mischief they are doing crawling about God's garden, and telling childish Eves and silly Adams that sin is sweet and that decency is ridiculous and vulgar? How many an innocent girl do they not degrade into an evil-minded woman? To how many a weak lad do they not point out the dirty bypath as the shortest cut to a maiden's heart? It is not as though they wrote of life as it really is. Speak truth and right will take care of itself. But their pictures are coarse daubs painted from the sickly fancies of their own diseased imagination. We want to think of women not, as their own sex would show them, as Loreleis luring us to destruction, but as good angels beckoning us upward. They have more power for good or evil than they dream of. It is just at the very age when a man's character is forming that he tumbles into love, and then the lass he loves has the making or marring of him. Unconsciously he molds himself to what she would have him, good or bad. I am sorry to have to be ungallant enough to say that I do not think they always use their influence for the best. Too often the female world is bounded hard and fast within the limits of commonplace. Their ideal hero is a prince of littleness, and to become that, many a powerful mind, enchanted by love, is lost to life and use and name and fame. And yet, women, you could make us so much better if you only would. It rests with you, more than with all the preachers, to roll this world a little nearer heaven. Chivalry is not dead, it only sleeps for want of work to do. It is you who must wake it to noble deeds. You must be worthy of knightly worship. You must be higher than ourselves. It was for Una that the Red Cross knight did war. For no painted, mincing court dame could the dragon have been slain. O ladies fair, be fair in mind and soul as well as face, so that brave knights may win glory in your service. O woman, throw off your disguising cloaks of selfishness, effrontery, and affectation. Stand forth once more a queen in your royal robe of simple purity. 1,000 swords, now rusting in ignoble sloth, shall leap from their scabbards to do battle for your honor against wrong. 1,000 Sir Rolands shall lay lance in rest, and fear, avarice, pleasure, and ambition shall go down in the dust before your colors. What noble deeds were we not ripe for in the days when we loved? What noble lives could we not have lived for her sake? Our love was a religion that we could have died for. It was no mere human creature like ourselves that we adored. It was a queen that we paid homage to, a goddess that we worshipped. And how madly we did worship, and how sweet it was to worship. Ah, lad, cherish love's young dream while it lasts. You will know too soon how truly little Tom Moore sang when he said that there was nothing half so sweet in life. Even when it brings misery, it is a wild, romantic misery, all unlike the dull, worldly pain of after sorrows. When you have lost her, when the light is gone out from your life, and the world stretches before you a long, dark horror, then even a half-enchantment mingles with your despair. And who would not risk its terrors to gain its raptures? Ah, what raptures they were! The mere recollection thrills you. How delicious it was to tell her that you loved her, that you lived for her, that you would die for her. How you did rave, to be sure, what floods of extravagant nonsense you poured forth, and oh, how cruel it was of her to pretend not to believe you. In what awe you stood of her, how miserable you were when you had offended her, and yet how pleasant to be bullied by her and to sue for pardon without having the slightest notion of what your fault was. How dark the world was when she snubbed you, as she often did, the little rogue, just to see you look wretched. How sunny when she smiled. How jealous you were of everyone about her. How you hated every man she shook hands with, every woman she kissed, the maid that did her hair, the boy that cleaned her shoes, the dog she nursed, though you had to be respectful to that last named. How you looked forward to seeing her. How stupid you were when you did see her, staring at her without saying a word. How impossible it was for you to go out at any time of the day or night without finding yourself eventually opposite her windows. You hadn't pluck enough to go in, but you hung about the corner and gazed at the outside. Oh, if the house had only caught fire! It was insured, so it wouldn't have mattered, and you could have rushed in and saved her at the risk of your own life, and have been terribly burned and injured. Anything to serve her, even in little things that was so sweet. How you would watch her, spaniel-like, to anticipate her slightest wish. How proud you were to do her bidding. How delightful it was to be ordered about by her. To devote your whole life to her and never think of yourself seemed such a simple thing. You would go without a holiday to lay a humble offering at her shrine, and felt more than repaid if she only deigned to accept it. How precious to you was everything that she had hallowed by her touch. Her little glove, the ribbon she had worn, the rose that had nestled in her hair, and whose withered leaves still marked the poems you never care to look at now. And oh, how beautiful she was, how wondrous beautiful. It was as some angel entering the room, and all else became plain and earthly. She was too sacred to be touched. It seemed almost presumption to gaze at her. You would as soon have thought of kissing her as of singing comic songs in a cathedral. It was desecration enough to kneel and timidly raise the gracious little hand to your lips. Ah, those foolish days when we were unselfish and pure-minded. Those foolish days when our simple hearts were full of truth and faith and reverence. Ah, those foolish days of noble longings and noble strivings. And oh, these wise, clever days when we know that money is the only prize worth striving for, when we believe in nothing else but meanness and lies, when we care for no living creature but ourselves. The end. Thank you so much for joining me, and have a good week.